Hey, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher. And in this video, I want to talk about how you can go from kind of just jumping around and not being really sure about what to work on into your practice session to having a really well thought out and refined plan. So basically, in my experience as a teacher, what I see a lot of really talented musicians, a lot of really smart people who are consuming a lot of information. So they may be downloading books, reading things off Amazon, even buying textbooks I've seen people do. Often people are watching tons of videos on YouTube about little practice techniques. Maybe if you're a jazz musician, you're learning some new idea for how to solo over a certain chord progression, or some new practice technique like spacing or interleaving. And basically what ends up happening is we have a tidal wave of content to learn, and we're consuming a lot of information about what we could practice and even how to practice better. But when it comes to actually applying this, people have a really hard time kind of bridging the gap, because what happens is if you watch 20 YouTube videos a week on new things you could do for jazz soloing, it's super unlikely you're going to be able to actually digest that and incorporate it into your playing. And so this can be really frustrating for people, because what ends up happening is you put a lot of time into consuming stuff. You may be doing this right now on YouTube while you're watching this, and your practice sessions end up getting really random. Like for a couple days, you do this new soloing concept over a 2-5-1, and then you read something about, how great it is to do singing and work on stuff with singing. And really what happens is, in the moment, what you're doing, the things you're working on are fantastic. They're usually well thought out. They're usually exercises that have been recommended by other teachers or different kinds of systems of playing. But there's no sense of your skills growing over time. And so if we walked into your practice room at any one day, it would actually look like you're doing things that make a lot of sense and that would benefit you musically. But when we ask you, what did you do over the last month? Or what did you do over the last 3 months? There isn't kind of a through line that leads to somewhere logical. And so if you want to be like a classical guitarist, there's a certain set of skills you need to learn, and you don't have to do them in an exact sequence, but generally over the course of months and years, you want to be progressing. Same thing if you want to be a pop musician or a composer or like a jazz improviser. There's certain sets of skills that go into these kind of bigger picture musical aspirations. And if you're not kind of covering your bases and reviewing things and building on things, you can kind of make yourself an ad hoc curriculum that doesn't really go anywhere. And so that's one set of problems that I see with people. And then the other set of problems is another set of people tend to just practice the same things every day. So maybe you're working on your improv skills and you keep doing the same exercises every single day over the same chord progressions. Or maybe you're working on something with your technique. You want to get your piano technique together or your guitar technique together, and you just play the same warm-ups every day. And that also tends to not work very well, because really what we want to do when we're practicing, we want to be working on things that we can't do yet. That's really what it means to practice effectively. We want to be incorporating deliberate practice into our sessions. We don't want to just be rehashing things we can already do, which ends up being very naive, and it can be very mindless and even get quite boring. So we want to be working on different things and challenging ourselves. And so these kinds of practice routines where we just kind of do the same thing every day, they may be difficult at first, but after like a week or after like a couple weeks, we've probably have started to squeeze most of what we can get out of it. And to just repeat that for 3 or 4 months, on and on and on, it doesn't really lead anywhere. So I want to offer you a different way of thinking about how you practice and how you organize your practice sessions. And this is a really simple way of doing this, and I found it's quite effective for myself, and I've had lots of students benefit from this. So what we really want to do is we want to take a step back, and we want to plan our practice at a bigger time horizon. So it's not a great idea to think of your practice sessions as individual things. You want to think of your practice sessions as being activities that are leading to you growing a set of skills. So if you want to learn how to play certain classical guitar repertoire, it can be very short-sighted to just think, okay, what am I going to do today? It's better to think about, okay, I want to learn these set of pieces, and these set of pieces have these kinds of challenges and these kinds of skills I need to learn, and this is how I could do this over the course of a couple weeks or a month. Now, I have found in my own practicing and through guiding many students to help them make better practice routines, planning on like either a weekly, but especially a monthly scale can be a lot better because it does a few things. The first thing is when we plan on a monthly scale, we don't have to be paranoid about doing something every single day. So a lot of musicians, they tend to create a set of 4 or 5 things that they do, or they work on the same pieces and they kind of work on them every day. Now, if you're not familiar with the research on the spacing effect and how powerful it is to take breaks and how useful it is to actually stretch your learning out over time, I highly suggest you go look that up or read a bit about it. But the punchline there is that you don't need to be working on things every day. You may want to work on something 3 or 4 times a week and then take a week off, or 2 times a week and take 5 days off until you do it again. And this will allow you to construct your practice sessions so you're not kind of frantically jumping from one thing to the other. You're not trying to do rhythm and technique and music theory and ear training and I got to work on my pieces. If you have a practice session where you're kind of jumping around every 5 or 10 minutes, for a lot of people, it's hard to develop a sense of focus and actually build things. So basically what we want to do is we want to take this monthly view. It could be 2 weeks, it could be 6 weeks. It doesn't have to be exactly 4 weeks or a month, but something around that time period is good, about 4 weeks. And you want to think of the big picture musical skills that you want to develop. So there's a few that I recommend that everyone seriously considers, no matter what kind of musician you are, whether you're a jazz musician, classical musician, pop musician. We're all going to have songs, pieces, or repertoire that we're going to work on. We all want to work on harmony, so understanding chord progressions, doing harmonic ear training, being able to recognize when someone's playing in major or minor, or is someone playing like a 1-4-5. Also being able to play those things on our instrument. Same thing for rhythm. We want to be able to recognize what other people are doing rhythmically. So if someone plays a rhythm, we want to know how to play it ourselves. If we read a rhythm on a piece of notation, we want to know how to audiate that. We want to know how to hear that in our mind and how to understand it. And then instrumental technique as well if you're an instrumentalist. Now, these are not the only categories that you can work on by far. I'm just giving you the absolute bare bones, what I consider to be something essential for any genre of music you're working in. So this would go for a classical musician, jazz musician, pop musician, so on. Now you can add other categories to this. If you want to be a jazz musician, you're probably going to want to learn how to improvise pretty well, so that could be its own category. If you want to compose music, that could be a category. And we can go down the list. We can add more areas of focus. So this is the way I'm thinking about this. I'm calling these areas of focus. Now what we want to do when we're making our monthly plan, we want to be thinking of a couple things we can work on in each area of focus. So if we take songs, maybe I have a little Bach piece that I want to work on, and I'm working on Autumn Leaves. And then harmonically, I'm going to be working on trying to audiate a 1-4-5 progression. I'm going to try to play it on a piano. I'm going to try to play it on guitar. I'm going to try to sing it. I'm going to try to do ear training, so when I hear other people do this. So I'm really going to put this little 1-4-5 progression through the ringer, and that's going to be what I'm working on for the month with harmony. Now, you go through the list, and I suggest keeping it simple at first, especially if you're a hobby musician. Come up with 1 or 2 things you're going to do in each area. Now, if you're a professional musician and you have 3 or 4 hours a day to practice, you can just scale this up. You can have 5 things you want to work on in each area, but I would err on the side of simplicity. So now we have, we'll back up for a sec. We have our monthly lens. We're thinking of practicing on a monthly scale. Now we've chosen areas of focus. We've kind of whittled our music down to, a set of categories we're going to work on. And we've populated lists of things we want to do in each category. So let's say I have all that done, and now it's Monday morning. I'm going to come downstairs, make a cup of coffee, and I'm going to practice. Now, what am I going to actually do? I'm going to just focus on one thing from that list for 10 or 20 minutes. Now, if you are familiar with some of the research on interleaf practice and variable practice, you might think it would be a better idea to kind of mix your practice up. And there is some logic to that. There is some truth to that. But when you're learning new things, it's a fantastic idea to just do this in a way where you don't feel rushed and you don't feel pressured. And so take one thing and start exploring it for 10 or 20 minutes. Now, the reason I'm saying explore it for 10 or 20 minutes, there's a couple points here. One is most people, when they're working on something brand new, your focus is going to suck. So if I asked you to play guitar for an hour and just to play pieces you already know, you'd probably be able to focus on that pretty well. But if I asked you to focus for an hour on things that are actually challenging for you, the quality of your focus is going to be very suspicious and probably not that great. And so it's better to kind of aim for something around the 20-minute mark. And it could even be less. It could be 10 minutes if the skill is very, very micro. So when we're doing this thing where we're working on one thing for 10 or 20 minutes, what we're really doing is we're taking one thing, maybe it's this 1, 4, and 5 progression, and we're practicing it in many, many ways. So I may be playing it on the piano. I may spend a couple minutes doing that, playing a 1, 4, 5 in a couple of keys. I may sing the bass lines. Boom, 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 boom. I'll make sure I can memorize that. Maybe I will spend some time trying to listen to a recording of simple pop music and try to identify a 1, 4, or a 5 chord anywhere I can. And so what we're doing is we're using this 10 or 20 minute period to really do a variety of activities related to this thing. It's not just like we're playing one thing on the instrument over and over and over again. That type of practice that is very repetition focused, it tends to not be very helpful for learning these kinds of micro musical skills. Now, when I'm working on a song, I might be playing a certain passage multiple times in a row. I might be listening to it. I might be singing it. And so the principle holds when you're working on an actual piece of repertoire or a song, you're using that 10 or 20 minutes to take a bite-sized chunk of the song and work on it in many different ways. If you want to watch a video where I talk more about this process of how to practice like this, where you're covering one topic in many, many ways, I have a video on my channel where I talk about some of the ideas from Paul Harris's book, Simultaneous Learning, which is a fantastic book. I think every music teacher and every student should explore that book. He's got such a simple and effective way of practicing, and it can really up your practicing and up your game. So that's the basics. So again, we have our monthly view, we have our areas of focus, we have little tiny components of what we're working on. And now we know what we should be doing in the practice session. We should be taking one of those and focusing on it for 10 or 20 minutes. If it's like pulling teeth and something's really, really challenging for you, you can stop after 10 minutes. But if you find you're getting a lot out of the session and you're able to cover the material in many different ways, like I described with the 1, 4, 5 progression, you could go for 20 minutes. Now what do you do after that? So now let's say I've worked on harmony for 20 minutes and I'm done. I'm going to take a break, and really, I'm just going to come back to that 2 or 3 times a week. So I don't need to be working on this every single day. Sometimes ear training or technique is good to do at first, maybe 5, 6 days in a row. That's totally fine. But you can take breaks, and there's fantastic research about the efficacy of doing this. The brain, the way that Molly Gebrian, who's a wonderful thinker in terms of how to practice and how to structure your practice effectively, the way that she talks about this, she has a bit of a neuroscience background, is that the brain needs literal time to reconstruct itself so it can do new things. So your brain is actually, we could use an analogy like building a muscle, but it's building neural hardware so that you can actually perform these musical tasks. And so when you work on something many times in one single day, it's not actually as effective as stringing your practice out over the course of days and even weeks. And this is why the monthly view tends to be much better for your practicing. If you made a weekly plan and then just did a bunch of stuff every day for the week and then moved on to something else, you're not going to get as much out of your practicing as if you do maybe 4 weeks or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of something, and you take little breaks in between the days. And so that's a good place to start. You could scale this up or down. Like if something's very, very easy for you, 2 days a week is probably good. If something's very, very challenging for you, you could go a little bit above that. You could do it every day, 4 or 5 days a week, something like that. But it's usually unnecessary to do something 7 days a week. You just get really sharp diminishing returns, and it's not a good use of your time. So now, with these two kinds of principles here, you have your list of what to work on, and you should be doing something 10 or 20 minutes a day for 2 to 3 days a week. You can actually just figure out how much time it's going to take this week to practice this stuff. And so if you have an hour to practice a day, you can go back and adjust your list if you want to add more content or take content away, but don't overwhelm yourself, and you really don't need to have everything you do be on this list. So you can still do practicing that's outside of this. You could still review pieces or just spend some time farting around on your instrument in a way that's not really super, super structured and organized, that's totally fine. But just having this base monthly plan will give your practice sessions a lot of structure. Now, once you've kind of completed your month and you're done and the things you're working on feel quite good, you're gonna start taking longer breaks off of what you're doing. So you could start taking a 2-week break or even like a month-long break before you review this stuff. And that's a wonderful thing to do. Now at this point, if you follow this process, you'll need to make a new monthly plan. And this is where this technique gets really, really powerful. When you start stacking month on month on month on month, you can really start to make strategic decisions about like, okay, last month I did a bunch of Bach pieces and that was great, but maybe it'd be good for me if I learned something kind of in a different direction. Or last month I did a lot of major harmonic stuff. I did 1, 4, 5 in major. I want to do something different. I want to learn to improvise in like Dorian or something like that, or minor. And so you can really mix things up. And then as you make the next month's practice routine, you can incorporate small periods of review into your practice. And if you're familiar with how interleaved practice works, where you actually mix up your practice sessions a little bit, that's how I do it. When I'm using interleaving and I'm trying to almost randomize my practice a little bit, where I might work on a scale for a minute or two here and there, a little technical exercise for a minute or two, I do that as a review process. So I might have a practice session for 10 or 20 minutes where I just review a bunch of stuff in a random order. And that actually tends to help and make the material more secure. But I do find a lot of people, when they're first learning something, they do benefit from having a period of time. It could be several days. It could even be this whole month period where you're not really worried about randomizing things and doing stuff like that. You're just worried about learning the content in a very honest way. And then you can come back and do interleaving and all that kind of stuff with it. So that covers, the basics about how to build a monthly practice plan. And again, really what this is going to do is when you're surfing YouTube and you're on the internet and, consuming music education materials, this will start to allow you to put it into a structure so that you're actually mastering things and getting more out of your practice sessions. I can't tell you how many people who have, saved playlist of YouTube education videos and then don't end up mastering those things, and it really doesn't go anywhere. And so what I would recommend that you do as you can still consume music education content, that's fine, it's fun to do, but start to document those things. Keep a playlist on YouTube, keep a note in Evernote or Apple Notes, whatever note-taking system you work, and just populate little lists of stuff that you want to work on later. So there's nothing wrong with watching, a great video on YouTube and thinking, wow, that could be a great practice technique. But for me, I can really tell the difference when I'm just watching something and it's kind of interesting. I might try it out for a couple minutes and not worry if it goes anywhere. But when I'm really seriously wanting to master something, I put it into this framework, I put it into this structure, and I know after, a few weeks or a month, I'm really going to have it down. And that's made, all the difference in my own playing and my own performance. A bit of a background about me. When I was a teenager, I was learning music very quickly, but I was playing music all day. There was no structure, there's no system. And if you play music all day, you can get a lot out of, a very unstructured practice system. But at some point I was hitting these walls, and what really made the difference in my, going from intermediate musician to a professional musician was actually just getting more intelligent about how I practiced once I was in the practice room, but planning my practice at a bigger scale. I used to really think about each individual practice session, and I would kind of hammer something for a couple days, and it wasn't that effective. What I was really doing, I was over practicing. I was spending like 40 minutes or 60 minutes, multiple days in a row working on something that I probably could have just practiced for like 20 minutes for a couple times a week, left it alone for a few days, come back the second week, left it alone. You'll get a lot more out of your practice sessions like this. And so you'll probably find if you do something like this, you can actually get away with practicing a little bit less if you wanted to, or you could spend that extra time, playing pieces and reviewing pieces. So it's a bit of a crash course on how I recommend setting up a little practice routine or practice session. Again, my name is Beau. I'm a musician and music teacher. I offer piano, guitar lessons. I also offer lessons in terms of ear training. If you're trying to learn how to audiate better and maybe your ear training is a bit of a train wreck right now, I have lots of students who just take lessons with me, and we learn to sing chord progressions. We learn to identify chord progressions by ear. We do a lot of rhythmic concepts by ear. So if that's something you're interested in, shoot me an email. I'm going to leave a little link for this next video you should watch if you found this one interesting, about Paul Harris's simultaneous learning concepts, which I found very valuable in my own music education. Thanks so much for tuning in.